Okay, are you guys ready to get a little bit techie? Don't be scared. We are going to talk about podcast host providers and RSS feeds. Do not let either of those things scare you. They're actually pretty simple to understand, and we're going to break things down for you today. First, let's talk about your podcast host provider. What is a podcast host provider? And how many times can Sunny say podcast host provider? Your podcast host provider, there I go again, is the provider, the service that is going to store your completed episodes for your podcast. I know what you're thinking. Sunny, I have WordPress. I can just store them right on my site, right? There's a little button I just upload media to, and why can't I do that? For several reasons. The first being, as wonderful as your WordPress website is, or whatever service you're using, it is not foolproof. It can crash, it can go down. And we want to make sure when people are taking their time to subscribe to your episodes and listen to your podcast, that it is available on demand whenever they want it. And it is very rare that the reputable podcast host providers go down. But how many times does a website go down, or is it inaccessible, right? So that's the first reason. The second reason is because the podcast host providers provide something for your show called an RSS feed. It stands for Real Simple Syndication, and that's because it is really simple. It is literally a link that contains the information about your episodes and your podcast, as well as your media files. And whoever has that link can display your episodes. Now, don't freak out, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because your podcast host provider will track all that information for you. Anybody that's listening to your episode through that link and getting your episodes through that link, all of that information is going to your podcast host provider, and the good ones are tracking stats for you and giving you that information, because that is what guests are going to want to know to come on your show. That's what advertisers are going to want to know to, invest in your show. You want to make sure that you're using a reputable podcast host provider that can give you what you need for your podcast. And I'll tell you what, there are a ton of providers out there. You could Google podcast host provider and be inundated with options. But the reason you came to me is because I have 15 years of podcasting experience, and you're trusting that I can guide you in the right direction because I've been there, done that, and you are correct. So in this video, I am not going to give you a laundry list of every single podcast host provider out there. More and more are popping up every day, and it would be impossible to do so. Nor am I going to give you a document that breaks down every single podcast host provider out there. I am going to give you a document that lists two podcast host providers, and which one you choose is dependent on your show format and your future plans for your show. Let me explain that. The first podcast host provider I'm going to recommend, I only recommend if you aren't going to incorporate ads in your show. If you are planning to sell ads or promote your own products, because I know a lot of you run your own businesses and there are things you want to promote in your podcast. You've got a book coming out. You've got a new course you want to tell people about. You have an upcoming webinar that you want to go out to your entire audience. Only certain podcast host providers have the tools needed to be able to insert things like that into your show. You've got one of two options. I've tried both of them. I actually personally know the people that run it, and it's not because they're my buddies and I'm just recommending something from a friend. It's because I go to the podcasting events and I meet these people and I ask them questions and I submit feature requests and I actually use their product. So that's the good news, guys, is I have simplified this for you. You've got one of two options. Download the document, consume it. If you have any questions, please reach out. And yeah, you definitely have to have a podcast host provider. You just got to pick the one of two options that works best for you.